All right, so welcome, Rich Castle. If you would, tell us who you are, where do you live, what kind of work you do.
Hi, Ron. Thanks for having me. I'm Rich Kassel. I run the clean energy and sustainability team at Capilino, which means I spend my days working with companies, nonprofit organizations, and others to try to advance policies and projects in New York that will help us meet our very ambitious climate, clean energy, clean transportation goals, and more important, bring us to a low carbon future.
Great, wonderful. And if you would, so people get to know you a little bit, tell us one thing that most people wouldn't know about you, Rich.
Well, here's the thing that nobody knows because I have actually not told this story for probably 30 years. Um, so I spent most of my career running the clean fuels and vehicles projects for NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council. That's how most people know me. I spent 28 years as either staff or a consultant. I ran our work in New York. I ran our work at the federal level. And then I ran our work at the global level, doing projects in Mexico, China, Sub-Saharan Africa, all over the world. That's what most people know about me. And when they think about me and my career, they say, oh yeah, Rich Castle, a diesel guy, meaning I spend most of my time trying to clean up diesel engines, not actually the opposite. But here's what people don't know. In the spring of 1991, I was looking for a new job and I was trying to move out of the private law practice I was in at the time and to go into the nonprofit world. I sent resumes to many organizations. At the same time as I eventually got a fellowship to start my career at NRDC, I got offered the position of executive director of a new organization called the International Mountain Bike Association, which would, as it sounds like, advocate on behalf of mountain bikers who wanted access to federal lands and things like that. Um, and today it seems like a no-brainer that, well, of course I would go to NRDC. Of course, that would be the path of my career. But at that young age, I spent as much time as I could on a bicycle, and I actually used to race mountain bikes and was fairly serious, not very successful, but fairly serious about it. And so when I got the offer to work for the mountain bike advocacy organization, at that moment, it was actually a hard call. Luckily, I didn't go that route because I've had a wonderful, wonderful run ever since.
That's great. And you're still an avid biker, I believe.
I am. I bike as much as I can. I spent 3 hours on a bike yesterday thinking about this podcast and other things related to work. I don't think I could do my work without my bike, but I sure am glad I took the NRDC job.
Awesome. So we ask people if they have what we call a quantum quote, a quote that you think helps change people's perspective on view of life. You got one to share?
I don't know if I have a quantum quote, but I do have two quotes that guide me in so much of what I do. Quantum's a pretty big word, so I'll let you and the audience decide whether they qualify as quantum. But the two most important quotes that I have running in my head almost all the time. The first that um, is that something that my dad told me when I was 18 years old, which is anybody who tells you they know what the future is going to be in 10 years is either lying to you or they're lying to themselves. That has been one of the most freeing up statements for me to think about opportunities and how we can think about our work in ways that are not defined by what we can see now, but what might be ahead of us around the corner, around a bend that we can't see. We can't possibly see, but we have to be open to it. And we have to be open to the notion that we don't really know what the future is. And so that's been super helpful to me. I think about it a lot because it allows me to be presented with new ideas and say, hey, you know, just because no one's ever done that before doesn't mean it can't be done. And the guy who says, hey, it can't be done, well, like I said, he's either lying to himself or lying to me, or I don't know. But the other one is that I think about a lot is that while we can't predict the future, it's really important to set goals and define where you want to go. So when these opportunities pop up, you can tell whether or not they're going to help you get where you're going, And I think that's super important too. I know we'll probably talk about our diesel work at some point during our time together today, but for sure, there's no way we could have had the success we had if we didn't say our goal has to do with reaching a certain environmental endpoint. We don't know how we're going to get there. The fuels are going to change, the technologies are going to change, but that's our goal, and we're going to be flexible enough to work with whatever fuels and technologies come our way, as long as they're going to be clean enough to hit our goals. So those are two things I think about a lot. Like I said, I'm not sure if any of them are quantum, but they're both pretty good.
Yeah, I think they're quantum. It's all good. Thank you very much. We like to start with why. So, why did you go into clean energy, Rich?
So I didn't go into clean energy at the beginning. I was very interested in cities and how cities work, and I was very interested in health and how do we live a healthy life in cities. And so those two ideas, how do we make cities work better, and how are we in particular healthier within them, led me, when I was early in my career at NRDC, to think about the problem of diesel pollution. In those days, the diesel buses on New York City streets were 100 times dirtier than they are now. That's not an exaggeration. I used to ride my bike. Again, the bike pops up. I used to ride my bike to work on 20th Street, and I'd go through Central Park. It'd be gorgeous. It'd be green. It'd be lush. The air would be clean. And then I'd come out of the park at 5th Avenue and 59th Street, and I'd head down 5th Avenue, which would be a wall of diesel buses, diesel trucks, yellow cabs too, of course. And by the time I got to NRDC at 20th Street, I'd be cursing those buses. And I'd be saying, why doesn't somebody do something about those darn buses? And then one day I realized, aha, I could do something about those buses. That could be the thing that I do. And that, and then I started poking around, and I realized that nobody in the environmental world was really focusing on this problem, in any meaningful way. That the public health community was increasingly putting together the links between diesel particulate matter and increased asthma and bronchitis, cancer, emphysema, heart disease, premature deaths. And I said, this is what I'm going to focus on. That's how I got into this. And so in the summer of 1995, we launched our Dump Dirty Diesels campaign. We sued for the right to put ads on buses in New York City that would say standing behind this bus could be more dangerous than standing in front of it. The MTA refused to run the ads. We sued them. We got more media attention than we ever could have gotten in any other way. And eventually what it led to was a very serious effort led by the Pataki administration to figure out the diesel pollution problem in the MTA buses, and a fleet-wide solution that reduced those particulate emissions by more than 95% in 6 years, and a model that now is the norm, not just in the transit industry, but the trucking industry nationwide around the world. And that was my entry point. That was my entry point. In those days, though, when we thought about diesel emissions, we thought about health, not about the energy piece of it or the climate piece of it. That was just starting to come in. And, the Clean Air Act structure treated particulates differently than it treated CO2. Everything pointed in different directions, and there were the silos were pretty separate. And it was over a period of time when I started looking more and more at transportation as a multivariable issue, that it's health and it's climate and it's mobility and it's equity and it's economic development. It's all these different things. It's land use. It's how we spend our money. It's how we spend our time, that all the pieces came together. and eventually started, coming together in a way that moved me more and more in an energy perspective. To a certain extent, we have figured out how to make transportation clean. The issue now is getting rid of the old dirty stuff that's still on the road. It's maintaining the cleaner stuff that we have, but the untapped potential is on the greenhouse side, which brings you into energy. And at the end of the day, the energy sector and the transportation sector, it's the same problem. We've got old legacy assets that are critical to how our city and state and country run. They're reliable. They work. The whatever investments to create them were paid for a long time ago, and now the challenge is how do we decarbonize them, that has brought me more broadly into the energy sector. I would say I spend more time today in the energy sector than the transportation sector, even though the lessons from one are definitely applicable to the other. And I find myself having the same conversations, whether I'm talking to people in energy generation or transmission or buildings or, my old home base of transportation.
Yeah, I mean, transportation is a part of energy, right? In terms of the fuels, right? So it's really, energy is electricity, it's heating and cooling of our buildings, but then it's also transporting ourselves around, and that's the three pieces of energy. So what are you working on these days, Rich?
So I have a great, I have a great work day. This is my work day. I have four baskets that I focus on. The first one is I work with a number of very exciting startups, young companies that for sure nobody's ever heard of, but they have great technology, they have great ideas, they have great energy, and they need help figuring out how to navigate their way into the marketplace through the regulatory structure, through grants and incentives. And that's kind of basket one. And so, I mean, just to give you an example, I'm working with one company that is bringing carbon capture technology down to a building scale level as a way to decarbonize New York City buildings. Working with another company that's coming up with ways to decarbonize diesel transportation um, uh, uh, by using a slightly different fuel and a slightly different technology approach. Will save fleets money and cut carbon emissions, maybe even ultimately be carbon negative. Really exciting stuff. That's basket one. Basket two is I work with a number of very large companies that have 100 years of experience in the energy or transportation sector and are now spending incredible resources to figure out how to decarbonize for low carbon future. Not because it's just the cool thing to do, but because they recognize their business depends on it and they're all in. And they're the business leaders in the sector and they're doing really great stuff. And that's a great second basket. My third basket is working with NGOs. Ron, you and I, of course, we know each other through a lot of different settings, but these days we overlap as chapter directors for environmental entrepreneurs. But E2 is one of 5 or 6 different organizations that I serve on the board or steering committee, advisory committee. They call it different things, but New York League of Conservation Voters and Regional Plan Association, Tri-State Transportation Campaign, New Yorkers for Clean Power, and of course E2. I spent a lot of time thinking about how to help these organizations succeed in what are sometimes very challenging political or economic climates. So that's great. And then last and not least, I chair EPA's technical advisory committee on mobile, what they call mobile sources, but the rest of the world would call transportation, fuels, vehicles, mobility. And we're doing a lot of exciting thinking about helping the EPA team identify and position for the transportation issues of the next 10 to 20 years. And that's really exciting as well. So I have a great work day.
Nice. Cool, man. Pretty awesome. 4
Yeah,
baskets.
it's pretty cool.
All right. So, how do you see the future evolving, Rich? I mean, what do you think is going to be happening? How is it going to all transition here?
Well, anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen in 10 years is they're lying to themselves and lying to you.
No
So,
crystal ball for you, huh?
but listen, we got to be optimistic, right? We got to be optimistic. The absolute worst environmental president ever has just been replaced by a guy who was really one of the early leaders on climate and environmental issues when he was a senator. That's a part of the story people don't think about when they think about Joe Biden all that much. But I remember back in the 90s that his office was filled with smart, ambitious, energetic, creative people who would work as till the cows came home to figure out how to advance environmental policy in those days when it wasn't front page news. And that's part of his DNA. I think that we are on the cusp of some exciting opportunities. So we already are in a position. Look at renewable energy investment. Last year, around the world, renewable energy investment somewhere around $300 billion. In the US, was around $55 billion. It was roughly 25, 28% increase over the year before. So even without a friendly federal government, money was flooding into the clean energy sector. I think that continues with federal leadership. We're going to see, here's a really easy way. Offshore gas leases are going to be replaced by offshore wind leases. I mean, we can start there and keep going. I think there's great opportunities ahead.
All right. So, if you were to say, looking at the current status, what's the pros and cons of fossil fuels versus clean transportation and the pros of EVs versus liquid fuels? Give us your quick overview there, Rich.
So I think the first and foremost, we have to ask ourselves, what's the key goal? Is it decarbonization or is it electrification? How you answer that question takes you down a slightly different path. For me, I answer it with decarbonization. That from my earliest diesel work, I learned that the key is to not pick the technology, but to pick the outcome you want. A fuel neutral, technology neutral, performance based approach where you can say, okay, we want 85% carbon reductions by 2050. How are we going to get there? Well, we're going to get there in a lot of different ways. We're getting in the light duty car sector, family cars, passenger cars, commuting cars. We're going to get there in large part by turning over the fleet we have and bringing in so many more electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, plug-in hybrid vehicles, and so on. It's a sector that is ripe for electrification. In the heavy duty sector, as the engines get bigger, as the duty cycles get harder, electrification becomes harder. And the answer starts to be much more around decarbonizing the fuel. So moving towards renewable diesels and fuels that may not even be in the marketplace yet, that are made by increasingly low carbon, zero carbon, and even carbon negative feedstocks, so that you start to have super advanced engines matched with super low carbon fuels, and you end up with a full cycle profile that looks like an EV, except that it's moving this massive truck, right? Look, as the engines get bigger, the solutions become different. And we start thinking about big industrial sectors, the cement and concrete industry, for example. If cement and concrete that industry was a country, it'd be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world behind China and the United States. Most people don't know that. That's a huge, huge hurdle that we got to figure out how to get over. Well, we're not going to get over it by saying electric is the only thing. We're going to get over it with low carbon fuels. Hydrogen may play an interesting role there. So it's very outcome based. One thing for sure, we're not going to reach our goals if we use high carbon fuels. We've got to figure out policies, incentives, and approaches that move the market towards low carbon and ultimately zero carbon replacements for the gasoline, diesel, natural gas that we're currently using. It'll take time. Transition will be will have to happen, and it has to happen in a just, equitable way, and it has to happen in a way that keeps the lights on, that gets people to work on time, and all the things that we rely on, because it won't be supported publicly if we're asking people to do something that doesn't actually work. I'm super excited about what's ahead. I think that we're living at an unbelievably exciting moment.
Cool. So, what do you think the biggest thing that people should watch out for and make sure they understand about everything that's happening?
I'm going to pause you for just a sec, okay? Let's start again.
There we go. So, what's the biggest thing you think people should watch out for and make sure they understand?
I think that there's so many things that we can do in our daily lives that help us bend the needle. Sorry, bend the curve.
Move the
uh,
needle, bend the curve.
that's right. In our own daily greenhouse inventory, there's all sorts of little things we do that make a difference. I really liked what the Meatless Monday people were doing a few years ago. And they were, just say, hey, you know what? When do you know that one of the bigger carbon contributions of your daily life was your hamburger? All right, not everybody wants to be a vegetarian, but be a little mindful of it. Um, for me, my carbon contribution has plummeted because I haven't been on an airplane. uh, I think the biggest thing that we just is just to be mindful of our choices, and frankly, to support policies when we hear about them that will help us decarbonize. Um, Policy matters. If we want to decarbonize the liquid fuels that will continue to be used in transportation, then we have to pass and adopt policies that do that. We use high carbon fuels not because the oil company is wants to do bad things. It's because the whole system is structured to incentivize using those fuels. We got to change those incentives, and so we got to, I think it's important to support when those policies come down the pike, because that's how we change how money gets spent in the business world, and that's how we change what we're buying at the pump. It changes what light bulbs we're buying at the hardware store, and on and on and on.
Yeah, I
That was
like
a
to
little
say,
rambly. I don't
that's
know,
okay.
but
That's
you
okay.
get
It's
the
all good.
point.
It's all good. Yeah, I mean, it comes down. I think it comes down to three things. It comes down to the personal, the professional, and the political. Right. So it's the personal. What can we do? What can I do? What can our families do? How can we change a light bulb? Do something that's more energy efficient in our homes? Do or change our transportation a little bit, etc. And then there's the workplace. And Climate Voice is now advocating and having major employers. So the employees are going into these employers and saying, look, we want this to change, and they're having an impact. These employers, because they're, as with E2, the environmental entrepreneurs, business has a big point of view. And when employees talk to their employers and their employers actually want to do something and they start speaking up and they align their policies with their programs, with their actions, then all of a sudden that has a big impact. So it's professional, it's personal, it's professional, and then, yeah, absolutely, it's the body politic, it's the public, it's what we all do together that absolutely makes a difference, and they all interconnect. There's one impacts the other. So, great points, Rich. All right, what's next for you in terms of where you see where you're going to be focused?
I I think that the technology hurdles that I've spent so much of my career working around and with, I think we're going to solve those. Fits and starts, some things faster than others, but I think that we're going to solve those. The piece that I think we all need to spend more time thinking about is how do we solve the equity issues that underlie our energy and transportation system, industrial system. Low income communities of color, frontline communities have borne such a disproportionate impact of our fossil fuel reliance. for our entire lives. And how we implement the clean energy future um, can be done in a way that doesn't think about that much at all, or it can be done in a way that really starts to reverse the decades of disproportionate burden. I think that's the piece that we all have to spend a lot more time thinking about. We have to listen to people who live in these communities, who have a perspective that's born from life of history. And I think that that's the piece that if I were to say, what do we need to spend more time thinking about and more time being creative about, more time being inclusive about, that's it.
Great. Yeah, there's no impact. There's no doubt. We've done a couple of shows on social and environmental justice, and the reality is that when you live in a low-income community of color, you're probably near a transportation system, the highways that are dumping tons of particulates into your local atmosphere, and then you have all the heating system from the buildings that you're in that are putting more particulates out. So that's why in certain parts of urban areas, the asthma rates for young kids are 25% and higher, which is just unbelievable. And then you have all the ancillary things that come down. And as I believe Van Jones said, one of our challenges is to do the work that most needs to be done, the environmental clean energy work, and to empower those who need the work most of all with the ability to then have the job. So to the work that most needs to be done to those who most need the work. And I think that's a really fascinating challenge to make happen and to have that transition. Thank you. That's great.
I remember I saw a presentation by a guy a couple of years ago who runs a wholesale bakery business, significant business. And he told a story about how he wanted to diversify his workforce. And he decided that you don't need a college degree to bake bread, and you don't need a clean criminal record to bake bread. His facility was in a low income community of color, and he said, "I'm going to just do first come first serve for jobs. And how do you get a job? You come and you sign up. You show up for work, you have a job. One rule: if you don't show up for work, you're out of a job. That's it. As long as you come and work, I'll train you and so on." And he told an amazingly compelling story about how he ended up with a workforce that was more productive, that was more, what's the word I'm looking for? He had less turnover.
Engaged, involved, motivated.
Yeah, and it really came down to two things. He said, it's when we ask people if they've gone to college, we knock out a whole bunch of people. When we ask people if they've ever been arrested, we knock out a whole bunch of people. And for a lot of jobs, those are just not relevant questions. Um, and so as we think about how do you get jobs into communities that have been disproportionately burdened, not just by environmental harms now, but racial justice harms, we got to start thinking about, well, what are the questions we're asking in a job interview, and are they actually relevant to the job? Or are they actually serving as a barrier to getting jobs to people who we say we want to hire? And that has really stuck with me. And I'm actually doing a fair amount of talking with people throughout the clean energy industry about how do we think about hiring, and in a way that opens the door to people at the early stages of their careers who maybe don't have some of the credentials of others, but have the commitment, the smarts, the heart, the soul, and let's figure out how to give them a shot.
Excellent. Absolutely. All right. A lot of us have gone through, you look at people who succeed, and almost always there's a story of their worst moment that then they learned something from that turned their life around. So, Rich, what was if you'd be willing to share, what was your worst clean energy moment?
This is a good one. So in 2002, I was part of a small group of people who created a new organization called the Partnership for Clean Fuels and Vehicles. And the idea of the partnership was we were going to take the success stories of clean fuels and vehicles advocacy and policy in the US and in Europe and create an international organization that would adapt all that to the developing world context. The first challenge would be roughly 100 countries still used lead in their gasoline. We would get rid of it everywhere. And the second challenge would be to clean up the diesels throughout sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Asia, and so on. So I went to a workshop in South Africa, and I gave a presentation to a group of government industry types about the need to get lead out of gasoline and sulfur out of diesel fuel, introduce catalytic converters, particulate filters, all the stuff that would bring vehicles in Africa to US or European standards. And then I had a lunchtime debate with the guy who was the head policy guy for the South African oil company, Sasol. We had a debate and we went at it, and probably 200 people in the audience. And it was great. And I scored my points, and I was smart, and I had a response to anything he said, and so on and so forth. And afterwards, he and I were walking out of the room, and he said to me, "You know, Rich, you can't beat me." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You can't beat me. But today's Tuesday. I'm willing to bet by Monday, you're going to be back at your desk in New York. And I'm going to be here lobbying Parliament against everything you just said. You can't beat me from a desk in New York." And it was just a kick in the gut, but it was an important lesson about the importance of boots on the ground and the importance of recognizing that when you take on an issue, you have to be willing to dedicate the resources that it's going to take to really achieve your goals. And you can't just swoop in, give a talk and swoop out and think you're going to change the world, because it doesn't work that way. And you just got to be willing to put in the sweat equity. And if you are, then you can win. But you have to invest the time, the energy, the resources, everything it takes. You can't just have a good idea. And that was really a valuable lesson to learn.
Excellent.
And
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, it's
yeah.
a great one. Really good. All right. Your aha moment where something came to you and you got it, and that just like changed your whole view.
When we were doing our first diesel campaign, we were trying to get rid of diesel altogether in the New York City transit fleet. The replacement fuel that we were advocating for was compressed natural gas. Ironically, given everybody's in the environmental world's view of fossil natural gas these days. But that was the gold standard in 1995. And the aha moment was when I realized that in order to convert the MTA fleet to CNG, I would have to wage 19 different ground wars to convert 19 different depots across their system, one by one by one. I'd spend my whole life doing it, and I wouldn't have anything that's particularly adaptable or replicable or scalable. And the aha moment was to shift the advocacy message from replacing diesel with CNG to replacing the diesel buses the MTA was using then to something that's as clean as CNG. And then I would say, I used to make the same joke. I don't care if it's diesel, natural gas, or grapefruit juice, as long as it's as clean as natural gas. That completely changed the political debate. It changed the way the diesel industry looked at what we were doing. It changed the way everybody looked at what we were doing. And we went from picking a one and only one technology to saying, we don't care about what technology we use. We care about the performance. We set a standard, and come one, come all, see what you can do. And that really changed the New York City debate. And it led to, within fairly short order, a fleet-wide commitment that included retiring 800 two-stroke diesels, the dirtiest of the dirty, as much as 7 years ahead of schedule. The first large-scale use of ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel in North America, 4,000 buses. 1,100 hybrid electric, the first large-scale use of hybrid electric buses, hybrid electric and CNG buses. And as I said earlier, dramatic, 95% plus emission reductions over a 6-year period, and the platform that is now, in use everywhere. There are tens of thousands of premature deaths eliminated every year because of federal standards that were put in place by the Clinton and Bush administrations that are now implemented. Every year, there are tens of thousands of premature deaths in the United States that don't happen because the federal rules are built on that platform that is fuel neutral, technology neutral, outcome based, particulates 90% cleaner than they were, nitrogen oxides 90% cleaner than they were. And our approach is now the global model. It's all around the world. And there are a lot of people and there are a lot of different moments that were all part of putting that all together. But the aha moment for me was when I said, you know what? We're going to get a lot more clean air if I say as clean as CNG instead of saying CNG.
Awesome. All right. Pulsar round, where we go into short, succinct, amazing, and mind-blowing answers to these questions. Are you ready?
I don't often have short, succinct answers, but
I know, you got to get with the program, Rich. Let's go. You ready?
Let's go.
Here we go. Okay. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Set your goal, stick to it.
Set your goal.
Trust yourself.
Set your goal, stick to it, and trust yourself. Nice. All right. One of your personal habits that contributes to your success.
I really like to ride a bike to figure stuff out. And at least once and usually twice a week, I get on a bike for 2 or 3 hours. And I actually spend most of my time thinking about whatever vexing problem I have. And by the end of the ride, I usually know what to do.
Excellent. So get away from it and exercise and get yourself out of this normal space, eh? That's a great suggestion. Yeah. Thank you. All right. An internet resource you'd like to share?
Well, I'm loyal to NRDC. I think their blog has information about pretty much any environmental issue you've ever thought of and a lot of issues you never have thought of. For really good data on emerging issues, I really like the stuff that comes out of the World Economic Forum and out of McKinsey. They both have newsletters that pop into my box several times a week. And, they've got the resources to really dig deeper than most people can. And I learn a lot from both of those.
Okay. How about a book that you'd recommend?
Anything by Haruki Murakami. Murakami is a Japanese novelist. I've always loved his stuff. It's a little surreal. It's a little window into Japan. These last 4 years, when I wanted a little bit of escape, a Murakami book usually did the trick. So I'm a big fan. That's my recommendation.
Outstanding. All right, Rich, if you had a magic wand and you could change it and change one thing for everyone in the world, what would it be?
Can I pick two? I got two. Well, Magic Wand 1 is definitely wave the magic wand and we have solved climate change. That's the existential threat that we face. And if I could wave a magic wand, that would be pretty good. Magic Wand 2 is actually goes back to my early days, really focusing my environmental advocacy around health issues. There are incredibly inexpensive ways that we can save millions of lives a year around the world through cleaner water, mosquito nets, better sanitation. There are so many low-cost ways that we can improve health and lives for millions and millions of people. And sitting in New York, we usually don't think too much about the rest of the world, but the reality is, if you want to save 1 million lives fast, you do it in another part of the world. And I've seen that in my career. And magic wand two would be that we would have the political consensus to put the resources into waving enough magic wands that all of those low cost ways you can save millions of lives fast actually get implemented.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
Magic wand three, by the way, since you asked, um, is that somehow I end up having dinner with Bruce Springsteen one night and we have a good long talk because his music and his words have been the soundtrack of much of my life. And a lot of what he thinks about are in terms of our country and people who are doing their best to get ahead in our country are very much the kinds of things I think about a lot. So Magic Wand 3's got to be a little fun because the first two were pretty serious. It's dinner with Bruce Springsteen.
And that's your own little magic wand for yourself. That's not for everybody in the world, but
Yeah.
unless everybody in the world,
Listen, I solved climate.
Everyone in the world can have dinner with Bruce Springsteen. That would be awesome.
I waved one magic wand and I solved climate change and made millions of people around the world live longer, better lives. Magic Wand 3, I said, little something for me.
Okay. All right. WTF or F, weather time fudge, an extreme weather event that you lived through and tell us the tale, or weather time fun and the most fun you've ever had and the weather that it was. Take a choice and tell us, please.
The most fun that I've had.
One or the other, fudge or fun. It's up to you.
You stumped me. You stumped me.
We could pass.
Question again.
So, yeah, we could pass on this.
A bunch of acronyms and I got lost.
That's okay. So yeah, well, we throw it out there as a fun thing. WTF or F. So, and basically the main concept is, look, most of us have lived through extreme weather events these days, and they're only getting worse, and there's more and more of them, and they're getting more severe. So, weather time fudge, an extreme weather event, or fun, just hey, hanging out, having a great time, the best time I ever had in my life, and it was this kind of weather. Some people do the snow, some people do the sun, some people do the fall. Other folks have done various different places and things. So, whatever you care to share, it's just a weather time kind of story.
Okay, so I grew up by the beach. And when coastal storms used to come in, I used to love going out to the beach to watch them, to watch the waves, to watch the clouds. I still do. They come a little bit more often than they did when we were younger. But I have so many vivid memories of specific hurricanes and tropical storms as they came towards the South Shore of Long Island or other beaches that I might have been at one summer or another. So that may be my answer.
Okay, that's great. All right, what's one thing that you're most energized about today?
Joe Biden. I don't know when your audience will be hearing us in this conversation, but today, Monday, November 9th, I'm just super energized by Joe Biden. But on a deeper level, I'm really energized about the next generation. I work with a lot of young people, and they are smart and creative and energetic, and they look at the world in ways that are exciting. And I just think that there's just exciting stuff ahead. And I love when I work with the younger people in the office and others. I'm super excited for what they're going to do with whatever ball we hand them when we're done. Yeah. We're already handing them the ball.
Yeah, they're going to be picking it up and running with it, man.
They're going to pick up and run with it.
Yep. All right. Piece of parting advice, and if you want people to get a hold of you, what's the best way?
Well, parting advice is just, stick to it. There's good things ahead. This is a really tough time, obviously. This has been the hardest year most of us have ever had. and we're not done. But there's also some exciting things ahead, and we just gotta, you know, like I said earlier, think about what we want to achieve, whether that's energy or otherwise, and keep rowing the boat in that direction, and know that you know with each day we get a little bit closer. And how to get a hold of me? I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. You can always find me at richard.castle at gmail is probably the easiest, since you already can see me, already have my name. But reach out anytime. You can find me on LinkedIn and all the other social medias. I'm around. I'd love to hear from you.
That sounds great. Anything that we missed, Rich, that you want to share?
No, this has been great. This has been great. I think anything that we've missed. No, I think this has been great. Have I missed anything?
No, no, man. You've covered a whole pile of stuff, so it's been great. So thank you so much for taking the time, for coming on, for giving it some thought. 3 hour bike ride. You were thinking about this most of the time yesterday. I mean, who could ask for more? So thank you so much for sharing your time, insight, wisdoms, and such a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure. Ron, it's always great to talk to you. And now we've got one of our conversations recorded for posterity.
That's right, man. That's right.
Better
Exactly
and
the
worse. Our
Yes,
grandchildren will
sir.
be able to pull it up and listen to it.
Exactly. It'll be great, right? All right, I'm going to stop the recording. Yeah, Rich, there was something else that you wanted to say.
Hit my record. Is it gonna be? I guess it's gonna be a different record. Okay.
It's okay.
Go ahead. Ask me the question again.
So there was something else that you wanted to say, Rich. What was it?
I think that the last piece to think about as we think about how do we decarbonize the entire economy, because that's actually what's ahead of us. Right? It's not what do we do with electric vehicles, or what do we do with buildings in New York City, but the whole kit and caboodle. How do we do it? And that the answer is really to look at each question, each sector, and figure out what makes sense. We're going to electrify all sorts of stuff, and that's fantastic. Got to do it. And we got to modernize the grid to handle all the load that's going to be needed to transmit all that new electricity to the vehicles and buildings that will use it. And we've got to decarbonize the liquid fuels that'll still be used, because most of the vehicles being sold today will still be on the road in 10 years. And 10 years from now, we'll still be selling plenty of gasoline and diesel vehicles. We're going to have to decarbonize the fuels they'll use until middle of the century. And then we got to figure out how do we decarbonize those really hard to get at sectors, marine shipping, aviation. I mentioned cement before. There are others, in those big industrial sectors, super important. And then the other piece of it, while we're doing all that, we have to create a regulatory structure that's flexible enough to be welcoming to the innovation that we're going to need to be successful and cost effective while we're being successful. Because it's not just figuring out the technology, it's figuring out how people pay for it. And that's a real biggie. We need to be cognizant of the fact that we can't see around corners. So when we create new policies, when we create new rules, we do it in a way that's welcoming and encouraging and embracing of innovative technologies and ways of doing things that will meet our long-term environmental goals. If we do those things, I think we'll be super successful. Uh, but the last point may be the most important one, because for all we know, there's something out there that really is the magic wand, not for everything. Different magic wands for different things, and we got to make sure we have room and space for them. So that's my
Excellent.
last thought.
That's a wonderful one. Thank you very much, Rich.